Welcome again to Crack on the Coast, the show that brings you stories of Irish culture, history, and people keeping those traditions alive. I'm Mike Schilling, and today we're joined by someone who has been a very good individual that I have met during this process. If anyone who has listened to all the previous episodes of our show, you've heard about our trip over to Strokestown and the experience of walking the National Famine Way and all the people that we met along that route and all the individuals that are bringing that to life in more ways than one. And today we're joined by Amy Day, the writer of the musical play In the Midst of Plenty, that is a powerful story rooted in Irish history. And we're glad that she could be aboard today so that we can talk about the roots of that show, how she was inspired, and where it's going to go from there. So, Amy, thank you for coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike.
So I guess we'll start like everything in the beginning. And so I would say, what inspired you to start the process of creating a show such as this? I don't know if it's within your background to write a musical play, but what gave you the courage to pursue it?
That's such a fun question to answer. So thank you.
You're
Thanks for
welcome.
having me and thanks for asking that. Yeah, so I'm a San Diego-based musician and I'm also a law professor. And in um, the couple of years before the pandemic, I was thinking that I wanted to write a full-scale musical. It was just sort of one of those things where, I was writing a lot of music, I was doing a lot of music performance, and I love musical theater, but it's very hard to sort of find the right story if you haven't made your life as sort of a full-time writer of musical theater. And I think even if you have, just to sort of find a story that's kind of big enough and important enough to sort of want to put yourself into a project like that for the amount of time and the amount of energy that something like that would require. And I have 3 kids at home and stuff like that. So I was sort of was in this period of like wanting to feel open to finding a story that I thought would be big enough and kind of powerful enough to wanna take on, and in 2019, I went over to Galway for the summer, over in Ireland to teach a course in international human rights as part of my law school teaching job, and so we went over with our whole family. At the time, my twins were 9 and my oldest was 12, and we went and spent the summer there, and I was teaching over at the Irish Center for Human Rights at what is now the University of Galway. And on a day trip, I went out to the National Famine Museum at Strokestown, which of course you've been to, you mentioned. And at the time, they hadn't gone through their big renovation yet.
Okay.
The place was a little bit simpler. I mean, did you ever go there sort of before the renovation?
No, no, this time past May was the first time I'd ever been there. So the idea of it not being as robust as it is now is interesting for me to hear about.
Yeah, it was a little different, but, the National Famine Museum there is, I think, it's really unique in that it is kind of this sort of, like, living monument to history, right? It's this place where you can visit it today, but it really transports you back to a different time period because it's obviously this place where, all these major historical events happened, and it's this place that is just this home to kind of the treasure trove of original, 1840s, 19th century original documentation of what was happening in that part of the world at that time. And so when I went to Strokestown, I don't think I knew what to expect really. I thought that it was interesting to kind of learn about that period of history, and I didn't really know that much about it. And I think when I got there, I was just so struck and so overwhelmed by what I was learning there. I think like a lot of Americans, I came sort of to the famine story not really knowing much other than that there was like a failure of the potato crop,
Sure.
and a big immigration event. I think that's what most Americans know, right?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It's something that we're working on as a division to kinda give the story more historical breadth so that people know about it. So I totally agree. I think that is what common knowledge is about the famine.
Yeah, I think Americans just have heard of potato famine,
Yeah, yeah,
and that's really it. And maybe you think like, okay, there's a big immigration event related to the potato famine, and that's about it. But as soon as you start to look at it with any kind of real depth or sort of curiosity, it's like a country does not lose a quarter of its population because of the failure of one crop, right?
Correct.
It's a much bigger story. And so when I went there for the first time, I was walking through the old museum, which was kind of in the basement of the museum, and you go through the different exhibits, and at the end, there's the gun, which is thought to have been used in the assassination of the landlord of this estate, in 1847. And all around this weapon were these kind of first-person testimonials from people who had been there at the time. Everyone from, laborers living on the land all the way through to, like, the secretary of Prince Albert and his son-in-law, and so depending on sort of where you were in society, in Irish or English society at the time, there were these different testimonials all around, sort of with different perspectives on this assassination of this landlord who, as you know, had 11,000 people living on his land and who had thousands of people evicted, thousands of people emigrated, and then ultimately this landlord was assassinated at the height of the famine, and I just thought, the power inherent in this story, right? What was happening in this particular part of the world in that particular period of history that motivated this assassination that led to this magnitude of population loss, right? To have, over 1,000,000 people starve, over 1,000,000 people emigrate, a quarter of the island's population gone, never to return. What was happening there historically, but what was happening sort of at the community level, and how did that particular event register or sort of read so differently depending on what part of the population you came from, right? Like, how complicated is this?
Right.
That these testimonials could be everything from this man was a saint to this man was the devil himself.
Sure. It's like an onion. You just keep peeling back layers, and it's a very interesting perspective with regards to the different ways it would be looked at. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and that's the thing about drama, right? Is that it's boring when everything is simple. When there's just sort of a simple story of like, here's our hero and here are our villains. And it's interesting when there's conflict all over the place. And I just guess I just sort of felt as an individual like it just hit me how powerful that Strokestown story was, and what a natural dramatic arc there was to it from what the real story was, right? How interesting that was, and I thought, "That's a world that I could study for a long time. That's a world that I could live in for a long time. That's a story that's big enough and important enough and has enough to teach everyone that it's worth my time." And it also at the same time, it lends itself to musical theater in the sense that this is a place where music and instrumentation and folk music and participatory song would be a part of life, right? I'm not trying to set a musical like in a disco on the moon, right? I'm setting it in a place where people have instruments in their hands and where people communicate through song and where culture is passed down through art. And so it just was this idea that came together really quickly when I was there at Strokestown that like, okay, this is the story. I can already feel that I can be obsessed with this for a lifetime.
Sure. And
Yeah.
that's a good point about how especially in Irish culture, just as much history has been passed down with art and music versus just written history volumes. So I think the idea, like you said, it lends itself to being in that type of medium.
Exactly. I mean, in our show, the instruments themselves are part of the story, right? Like what someone does in order to hang on to the harp that her father passed down to her, or what it means to have a fiddle in your community, even when everything is being sold and everything is being lost. And so I could see that all pretty quickly, but at the same time, I knew that there would be a lot of work to do to be able to start to get my head around a story that is that sensitive
Sure.
and to do it in a way that was respectful.
That I could, yeah. I mean, that's a very good balancing act that you would have to undertake to be able to touch on the topics that are, like you said, sensitive, but be able to portray it in a beautiful way. It's interesting. So a couple episodes ago, we had Carolyn Callery on, and we talked about the story of Strokestown and that very topic of how even to her generation living in Ireland, how we talk about how much is known about the famine, it's really not that much different even there. And in those in her generation of what they were taught about what really occurred during that time period, it's only probably in over the course of the last 25 to 30 years that there's been more research and the academics get involved, and like we said, the historical breadth of the famine itself has come to light. And the story of them finding all the documentation at Strokestown is, I feel like that's a story unto itself, let alone what all the material's about. So it
It's
is.
remarkable. The story of her father, buying that estate and just discovering the records that were kept there. I didn't know about that, the way that sort of records were kept in that time, the same way that written records were kept the same way that we, like, keep all our emails or keep
Right.
our tax returns and stuff. They're just keeping boxes of letters, and this house just happened to have all of them, and Jim Callery, happened to buy the place and recognize the power of what it was that he was opening. And for him to then preserve all of that for generations to be able to see what was there, I think is quite remarkable. Actually, the director of our show has been thinking about how to work Jim's discovery of that record into what we're doing on stage. Sort of like he's kind of toyed with ideas of, like, can we frame the show in the opening of the boxes, right? Like that we're not telling a contemporary show, we're telling a story that's set in the 1840s, but,
Right.
like, we are so struck by the power of what he found and what he preserved.
I can wrap my head around that. Like that's like a poignant opening of where the information is found and how the story begins. That would be really neat. I'm not totally against that idea. I don't know how. I'm not a writer, so I don't know how you work it in, but
Right.
it is a fascinating way to start it and give a little bit of a nod and an Easter egg, we'll say, to Jim and the Calorie family. That would be neat. So we know the historical setting, obviously. It's all based around the famine. If you want to get into the storyline a little bit, or if we want to leave information for people to find out, that's fine too. But I think beyond the we can get into the storyline, but maybe before we get into that, I would be very interested to hear the undertaking it must have took to do the research involved so that, like you said, you can give it the honor, the historical, factual part of it with also trying to make it a musical and make it beautiful.
Yeah, both amazing questions, both fun questions. It's so fun to get asked about this stuff. Um, so when it came to the history, I don't think I would ever have written this project if it was not for the pandemic. The sort of the pandemic isolation and the amount of time, and I guess, yeah, just the isolation and the time that came with the pandemic. I don't know that the amount of reading or sort of remote talking to historians could have happened under any other circumstances. Because I think we're all just too busy with our day to day, right? Unless the world kind of stops. And
Right.
so, yeah, I started with kind of the major books on the historical period. So there's kind of one of the leading historians on the Strokestown story is a historian out of Maynooth named Ciarán Riley,
Okay.
and I read his book. He has a book called Strokestown and the Great Irish Famine. Um, in his book, it really goes sort of specifically through the Strokestown story, and he's got a lot of the book is also very visual. It has a lot of the documents that come out of Strokestown and pictures that have come out of Strokestown. So he tells the story of what happened at Strokestown, and his was one of the first books that I read, and so was Peter Duffy's book on the Strokestown story, and Peter's is much more sort of dry. Like, it's the type of thing where you can only get through a page or 2 a day because there's so much detail to it. Starting with the Strokestown story was kind of in some ways maybe not the right place to start because it because it's like there's this broader historical context that was also so important. So there's kind of this chicken and egg problem. Like, do you learn about what happened in this one little place, or do you learn about sort of this bigger geopolitical event? And so I just had to pick a place to start, and I started with the kind of the Strokestown thing, and then got into some of the bigger books, like some of the, Christine Keneally, whose work was obviously very, foundational in understanding kind of the broader political context in which the famine happened.
Sure. Yeah.
Um, and I read writers like, have you ever heard of, Asenath Nicholson? Do you know who she is?
I do know who she is. I haven't read that book. I've read Christine's material because I'm also friends with Christine, so I would feel like a hypocrite if I didn't. But no, I haven't read her. I know who she is, but I haven't read her material yet.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, she was an American, like, evangelist in the kind of the and also abolitionist. She was I mean, just a totally fascinating, character. She's living in New York. She was widowed young. She's living in New York. She's a vegetarian teacher, abolitionist, writer, and thinker who left, New York and walked Ireland in the couple years before the famine and then during the famine.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, and she walked it on she walked it on foot, and this was mostly it was sort of a Christian ministering to the poor, but she was writing and having her articles published contemporaneously in abolitionist papers in New York. So, there's this sort of connection ideologically during that time between the experience of the sort of socioeconomically disadvantaged and disenfranchised impoverished Irish population and the abolitionist movement in New York. There's a sort of a real sympathy that was happening between the groups of people who cared about these things. And so she's writing these contemporaneous first person on the ground accounts of what life was really like for people. And she's a woman doing this. So she'd stay with clergy. She had this thing where anytime she would get too comfortable, she'd move on. So she sort of kept herself in this position of discomfort and ministering to people and giving what she had. She was stolen from, and she writes about she writes these very moving terms about kind of the moral justification of behind doing things that in other times we would consider to be morally reprehensible. So she wrote at the time, and then she also had a biographer who wrote, maybe a decade ago about her experiences, and that started to sort of set me, her writing, and then also Christine Keneally has a book, Women and the Great Hunger,
Mhm.
which she co-authored with, Kieran Riley, that has pieces that really focus on the experiences of women during that time.
Which
Because
her story's always been fascinating to me because a conversation I've always had with Christine or another individual that we both know, Catherine Shannon, who is a wealth of information on the famine, is that there really was not a lot of written firsthand accounts of what was going on in the country during that time period.
Right, exactly, and, I mean, I think we all sort of understand that, like, history is kind of narrated by the people who have pens and paper.
Right.
Um, right? And when you have this population that's living in the most sort of abject destitution, like, they're not writing stuff down. They don't get to tell the story.
Yeah. No,
And
exactly.
that's in part is what is so interesting about Strokestown are sort of the snippets of what you do get, what the real original source materials are that are coming from people who are living that way. And that primarily came in the form of the petitions that women were writing to their landlords. So between Christine's work and this sort of contemporaneous first person stuff that Asenath Nicholson wrote, like reading about that, my mind was really going to like what were the experiences of women in this time because there's kind of this decision to make as a writer of like whose story are you going to center, right? Are you going to tell the story of the wealthy landlord whose story gets told over and over, right? Because
Right.
he's the one whose story of the history is recorded. Or do you think about making the real story within the story that you're focusing on stage something a little bit different? And that's kind of what I ultimately tried to go for was to learn about the broader geopolitical context, to learn about the sort of political and social and philosophical and moral ideas that were prevalent at the time that led to the broader food crisis and economic crisis, but then specifically whose story within that gets told on stage and whose story comes into focus. And I just knew that I really wanted that to be a woman's story and particularly kind of a mother's story.
Which I think is great. I mean, there's a lot of historical context during the famine, it really is in times of situations like that, it really is mothers and children that bear a huge brunt of the destitute of what's going
Mhm.
on.
Right.
So God, that's a lot of research. Okay. I definitely I give you kudos to all that, and then for you to do all that research and then turn it into a coherent production. I mean that in itself is just it's remarkable. So how long did it take you to do the research and then get yourself to a point where you felt like, okay, you could start putting pen to paper and actually write the show?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hit a point where I thought, "Am I trying to write a musical or do I wanna go back and get a history degree?" You know? Like, 'cause I spent a lot of time on Zoom, particularly with Kieran Riley, so he probably should have charged me tuition for the amount of, like, Zoom classes he taught me. He would get out, like, so he obviously he teaches all these courses in Irish history at Maynooth, and, he would actually, like, get online with me and take out, like, share his screen and walk me through, undergrad level slideshows on, this is the way land ownership worked, and this is the way land, just everything about kind of because I was trying to learn what the social structure was, right? Like,
Sure, yeah.
what is a landlord and who lives on their land and what power do they have over them and who are the people in the middle of this and what's the relationship to them with the clergy and all the sort of who are the kind of Irish middle class and merchant class and what's the relationship to parliament and all that. It's like you have to understand that in order to write a story that talks about the conflict between those groups of people or the way that those different strata were sort of interacting with one another. So it was a lot of time with him, and I did, because I do work in academia. I think I have a lot of respect for historians, and I think I could have stayed in the research stage forever because number one, it's interesting, and number two, I never felt like I knew enough. I never really felt like I knew enough, and I still don't feel like I know enough. Right? We just keep learning.
Oh, sure, yeah, I mean,
Um,
even in my I mean, with all the experience and everything I've read as being part of the Hibernians and then having the people around me such as Christine Keneally, and I mean, as much as I would ever learn, I still feel like I could never be in a room with them and have be part of a conversation and not feel like I'm the least intelligent on the subject, so I should just keep my mouth shut and let everybody else talk.
Yeah, totally, and me too, and the great thing about this, this sort of subject matter is that, people in Ireland at the time and writers in the time said so many things that were so beautiful that it was not hard to find what the songs needed to be.
Oh, that's
So
great.
it was probably yeah, it was probably, a year of sort of pure reading and then sort of pure reading and research and the beginning of outlining making the decision about who my protagonist would be and whose story we would focus on. And okay, it's going to be it. I made that decision because at the time I'm sitting here in a period of global crisis. Of course, it's not a global crisis that really rivals what happened in Ireland at the time of the famine, but it was a crisis, right? And you're thinking about what choices will a mother make during a time of crisis to protect her family.
Sure.
And so right? So that's what the story is gonna be. So it's set against the backdrop of the famine. It's set against the backdrop of the assassination at Strokestown. It's the plot follows the story of what happened to the tenants at Strokestown, but ultimately, we need to care about an individual and her family and her choices and her mistakes and her guilt and her redemption. And, um and so, I think I made that decision within about a year and I started writing. But what was really great about all the source material is that these things get said, right? Like there's so much poetry to what is said in Ireland that that the song choices were very obvious. So like the name of the show is In the Midst of Plenty, but that's a phrase that came out of the time, right? The idea that there was this starvation and this suffering in the midst of plenty because there was food in Ireland. Food was
Right.
being exported. Food
Right.
was being sold. It was being exported. It was being grown by people who weren't allowed to eat it. And that's not my phrase, right? That's just in the literature or "Justice to Ireland," right? That's the third song in the show, and that was a phrase that was used in Parliament among kind of the Anglo elite that, of course, ruled over Ireland at the time, and they used this phrase "Justice to Ireland" as kind of this catchphrase to signify the way that they were going to improve Ireland by getting rid of all the paupers who were on the land, justifying this kind of reduction of the population in Ireland with this very deliberate, ideological framework of, God is doing this to Ireland because because God thinks that the Irish are living in a way that's sinful and immoral. And, laissez-faire economics, and we're just gonna let the hand of the economy do what it will in Ireland, and we're not gonna interfere with that. And so that's sort of like a rallying cry of justice to Ireland that kind of like deeply, you know, patronizing idea that like, oh yeah, yeah, we're just going to let things go the way they're going to go in Ireland, and we are not going to help, and we're going to justify it with this ideology. They call that justice to Ireland. Hey, that's a song, right? Um,
Which that song, like, I feel like that song came out great because it's very good at kinda coining the ignorance about how pompous they were, that they were so right in how they believed the country should be treated and what was happening, and it really it is a great it's a great piece of music that really does a good job of kind of giving you that perspective on how they viewed things during that time period.
it's, and I feel like it's one of those things that we always need to keep in mind happens at the political level, right? Which is that political leaders adopt these sort of convenient rhetorical justifications for whatever it is they wanna do, right?
Right.
And, so the language was there, or like the language of worse than Cromwell. So at the end of the show, right, as the sort of the people in Strokestown are kind of rising up or sort of trying to rise up despite the fact that they are sort of physically unable in Strokestown at the time, like if you walk through Strokestown, you'll see this quote that's being used there that after these, after the landlord at Strokestown is paying to send all these people abroad, and there's all this death on the coffin ships carrying people to Canada off the Strokestown estate, the people back at Strokestown are saying that the landlord is worse than Cromwell, and yet he lives. And okay, well, there's our there's the climax of our show, right? So it was not. It's just so easy as you go through the reading and you see the things that were said. They just lend themselves to being set to music, and so it to write a story that is kind of punctuated by those different, rallying cries or those different, statements that were being made at the time, just that kind of flowed. That was the fun part.
That's great. Now, so you get the writing done, you start production, you're picking your crew, director. I was very lucky enough when I was over in Strokestown to meet Anne-Marie O'Sullivan, who's a wonderful individual. I could definitely understand her creative sense by just meeting her over there and then getting to meet the both of you when she came over. So you get through production, and do you I guess the question I would have is, first of all, I don't know this, where did the show debut? Did it debut in Strokestown?
It did. So I was writing here in the US, but I was following everything online that I could about the Strokestown story and about Irish history, and I was just really trying to be kind of immersed. I knew that I wanted the show to be developed in Ireland because I am not an Irish person, right? I'm an American writing in the US, and I'm telling a story that's Irish, and there is a really big problem in theater of cultural appropriation.
Mm,
And as I got deeper into this story, I had a lot of conflict internally over, like, is this my story to tell? Because when I first came to the story, I thought like, okay, this story belongs to history. Like there are so many lessons from this story that anyone in any period of time from anywhere in the world would find important. But then as I got deeper into it, it was like, okay, this is still a very relevant piece of what has happened to Ireland that I do not know that I'm the right person to tell this story. And the only way that I felt like, I felt that I had done the work, right? Like I had done the work in a way that I felt had integrity, but like I did not think that this could just go to the Ocean Beach Playhouse in San Diego and then be cool. Like I was like, no, this has to be worked on in Ireland. Like it's an Irish story. This is Irish history. And so I was just starting to pay attention to who was making theater there as sort of the pandemic was coming to an end. I had written the script and the score. I had my demos. So I kind of had recorded all the songs with local musicians.
mhm.
Um, and I was following Anne Marie on social media because Anne Marie has theater company, Enchanted Cree Theater. She lives on the grounds of Strokestown. So she was making theater at Strokestown, and she actually was doing, like, a digital theater project coming out of the pandemic that was about the same family, right? The family of owners of the, at Strokestown, but she was just telling a story that was set during World War One. So I messaged her on Facebook, and she thought I was making it up. So I was like, "I'm writing this famine musical." She thought I was one of her friends trying to, like, mess with her, which, like, I would totally do. But
Oh,
I was like, "No, I'm telling the truth. I really am writing a family musical." And then I sent her some of the demos, and she was like, "Oh, you really are writing a family musical." So in Roscommon at the time, coming out of the pandemic, there were these big, or there were not big, but there were grants that the government was issuing to get live performance to start happening again.
oh, wow, okay.
So obviously in Ireland, Ireland is so strong on support for the arts, especially compared to what we're used to here in the US, right? Like there's so much public support for the arts, and it's really incredible. And Anne Marie mentioned that there was this grant she wanted to apply for, and when she said that, from an American perspective, I was like, "Okay, great, that's not anything."
Yeah.
But, like, she knows the arts officer, and she asks them a question, and they answer it, and she hears back in 2 weeks, like, it's a totally different thing.
Oh my god, that would never
So
happen here.
no, 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 of course not. So she applied for this live local performance programming scheme grant to bring the show to the stage, and that was really audacious. Like, usually a musical starts with, like, workshops and staged readings and, development and a in-concert sung-through version, but she applied for, like, a show. So I was like, "I don't know if this script is even anything." I've been alone in my bedroom in America for 2 years. So, that was pretty intimidating. So but she got the grant, and, she found out in February that she got the grant and that we were gonna be doing it in June. So and I still had a couple songs to write.
Wow.
Um,
Talk about being under
yep.
the gun.
Yeah, yeah. So I wrote songs. I wrote s yeah, several of the songs from the show were written after we found out about the grant, like, including Worse Than Cromwell. That was written after the grant, 'cause I knew I had to write it, but I was always, like, sort of intimidated by the fact that it needed to be, like, in this kinda rougher genre. And, yeah, so she got the grant, and then I went over and we spent a month, we cast the show, like, remotely online, and then we spent a month just developing it. So, getting it up on stage in kind of the quickest way that we could. We had a band, we had the cast, who are also really wonderful vocalists, and our first 3 performances were at Strokestown. So they were at the museum at Strokestown Park. We just had 100 tickets a night. We sold out those first 3 shows, and, once we did those first 3 shows, we realized, like, "Oh, okay, like, we have something. This story does resonate," and telling the story, which who really wants to go out for, like, a fun night out and a famine musical? Like, that
Yeah.
that doesn't sound like the best night out. So you kinda have to prove that that the concept, like, is not gonna torture you for a night. It uses music to tell an important story, but in a way that I think takes some of the immediate brutality out in a way that makes it something that people can engage with in a theater as opposed to not being able to do that. So, yeah, we did 3 shows at Strokestown, and that was how it began.
That's great. That sounds insane that you literally spent over a year doing your research and writing, and then next thing you know, you're on a tight deadline to basically put the rest of it together and get it ready for production. That sounds
It's
about right,
terrifying.
though.
It was completely terrifying. I mean, I it and the cross-cultural thing was terrifying, right? Like, here's an American showing up in Strokestown being like, "Hi, I wrote a musical about you. Um, how do you like this?" And the members of our cast have ended up being, like, some of my best friends in the world at this point, but, like, at the time, even just even just the accent was so different to my ear that I didn't even really know how to, like, be funny.
Mhm.
And it took a couple weeks to even be able to, like, joke around with people because everyone is so funny, and it was just yeah, the whole thing was very, very intimidating. I did not deserve the level of, like, graciousness that I was shown by the people that I showed up and worked with.
Well, I will say this, I would say a lot of that has to do with the quality of the people that are involved with the Strokestown project. I mean,
Yes.
when we had Carolyn on and I brought up the show, what she said to me was, "Michael, it is a show worth getting on a plane and flying to Ireland to see." And yeah, and everybody just my whole just how you explain the experience of going to Strokestown and experiencing that and experiencing the people that are so passionate about the project and what they're trying to, undertake. That was my experience when I went there this past May, and I guess that's
Yeah,
why it's been starting this podcast, it's been very heavy laden on that trip that it all comes down to the impact it had and the impact of meeting the people there, meeting the people that got Strokestown up and running and got the museum up and running and people who have been, like I said to Carolyn, I said, it's an amazing thing to do something that someone would term inspirational. It's another when you're inspiring others to do things as well. And I feel like she's achieved that with what they're doing with the Global Famine Way, with what you and Anne Marie and your whole team is trying to put together and expand upon. It really comes down to if Strokestown didn't exist and that story of Strokestown wasn't uncovered the way, I don't know what if you call it karma, happenstance, whatever you believe in. If that didn't happen, none of what we're talking about now would be there, you know?
oh, not even remotely, yeah, not even
Yeah,
remotely possible.
yeah,
Yeah, I think there's something that's just so unique about how immersive what they've created is, and the passion with which they have preserved it, because it's not like you're just going into a museum that has stuff on the wall. Like, you are going to the place. You are going to the land where these things happened. You are walking the path that the people walked. You can see, oh, that's the hill where people were, that's the church where, like,
right.
the level of immersiveness of that is what makes it, I think, so powerful in a way that I definitely would not have seen if it was not at that place. No way.
Yeah, no, it is. It's amazing. Now, from all accounts, from everybody that I've ever talked to that has seen the show, which I unfortunately have not been, I am not one of those people, which I hope to rectify at some point. No one has anything bad to say about it. So I take that as is that you guys were very successful when the show finally was able to be brought to Strokestown and beyond.
Yeah, I mean, I was scared of just about everything you can be scared of, right? I was scared of the, like, cultural appropriation, I was scared of the, "We don't need an American to write this story," I was scared of famine is not entertainment.
Mhm.
That's a really hard one to think through, right?
Sure.
Famine is not entertainment. There was a lot to worry about. We also got, we took on a 2023 tour that was just nuts for us to take on because so we did the first 3 performances at Strokestown, and then we had another round of funding from the Roscommon County Council. So the, Roscommon County, arts officer, Rona McGraw, she was, obviously she was at our first couple of performances, and, then she supported us with another round of grant funding that brought the show to the Roscommon Arts Center, like, a couple months later. So we did it in summer 2023, then we took it 2022, then we took it to the Roscommon Arts Center in the fall of 2023 or 2022, sorry. There was kind of this demand like, "Oh, you should bring it to this theater. Oh, you should bring it to this theater." And we had support from Caroline, we had support from the Irish Heritage Trust and the National Famine Way, the National Famine Museum at Strokestown, a little bit of private funding, but we really did not have, we moved really fast. Like, we really didn't have the funding that we needed to go from like, let's throw this thing on stage in 4 weeks to like, let's take this all around Ireland. And it was kind of this very, like, DIY thing, like, "Okay, we're gonna go to these theaters, and we're gonna cross our fingers that we're gonna sell the tickets, and that would then when we go to the next town, the 180 people who were in the theater the first night are gonna tell their cousins the next town over to go." And that's what happened, right? Like, that is how we sold our tour, and it did end up being really successful by any measure that we could have measured it by in terms of, like, we honored our financial commitments, right? We had like a paid cast and crew and so the show was sort of successful by that measure and sort of by ticket sales. But I think much more importantly to us, just the reaction that we received when we went from one community to the next of like of sort of joining with us in feeling the power of the story that we were telling and like telling it through music. And was incredible how many people talked about their own family stories or the way that their family does not talk about what happened to with their own family stories, right? Because anyone who is in certain parts of Ireland now, it's like this is part of their family's legacy that maybe is not talked about
Sure. Yeah.
because right, because what people had to do to survive or what people lived through is something that maybe you don't speak about.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, the story that Carolyn shared when she was on, and the idea that, the young boy,
Daniel Ty.
Daniel Ty, and the fact that when they found his descendant, it was totally based off of their knowledge of the story is literally just spoken word passed down from generation to generation. And I said to Carolyn, I said, "I find that fascinating because in a lot of instances, that's not the case." Just like you said, it's for a lot of families and a lot of legacy, it's not something they wanna relive, it's not something they wanted to admit, there's a lot of shame in it there's trauma attached to it, and so the idea of people reliving that is obviously really difficult, at the same time, in our own experiences, in our historical work that we do as Hibernians, you also realize that sometimes it's just people need to be asked a question. And once they start explaining and they start talking, it becomes easier. And then
Mm,
you get amazing stories and amazing history that might not have ever been told if you didn't at least just ask a question.
yeah.
So
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think it's what your show is doing is giving people that opportunity to emote, what they might know about what their family's experiences were during that time period. Because it's not that far removed. That's another conversation Carolyn and I had. When you really think about it, we're talking about 150 years.
Mm.
That's 3 generations, 4 generations maybe, depending upon your current age. It's really not that far, and how they talk about the fact that trauma is passed on from generation to generation just through DNA. I mean, it's still there. It's still pertinent. I mean, not to mention the fact that the story of the famine and the overarching discussion of government and politics and how the world treats it, unfortunately, is still a talking point today. So it's the play has current event. It stands up to current events as well.
I mean, it's impossible for an event as big as the Irish Famine to not continue to have parallels in any time, unfortunately, right?
Right.
And I think at the time that I first started, working on the story, there was one set of parallels that, that continue to be there, and maybe now there are different ones. And, something this big doesn't happen without there being underlying causes that continue to repeat themselves, right? History will repeat itself. And I think one of the things that we just try to do with this show is, like, we don't make explicit political statements. That's not the lane that we're in, right? We put a show up on stage and people can look at that show and they can see a lot of different things in it, right? They can see the parallels, or they can think about what they might be thinking about, that is going on in the world at a particular time, or choices that governments make or choices that people make, and they can see it in that story because that story is so big that those narratives are in this story.
Yeah. Yeah. So you go through the DIY project, as you put it. Uh, in the end, how many shows were you able to put on before you finally said, "Okay, we need to take a break"?
So in 2022 we did 7 shows, and then in 2023 we did 19 shows across 14 venues, and with all that together, we sold about 4,000 tickets to the show. Yeah, yeah, I think we. um,
Did you make it to all the counties, like, throughout the island?
we did not. We actually were not very heavily present in the South, really, at all.
Really?
Uh, yeah, we had one show in, like, Ballyduff, County Waterford, and we were in, like, we were in Tipperary and we were in Carlow, and that's about it for anything south of, like, kind of the Midlands to Dublin line. Like,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, the show, obviously, like, the story that the show tells of kind of that exodus from the migration event out of Strokestown. They walked the National Famine Way, which is, sort of through the Midlands to Dublin.
Right.
So that is kind of the core of where we were kind of taking the show in the first place. But
Mhm.
yeah, we didn't get down south very much at all, and we hope to the next time that we get to bring the show out again.
Sure. I mean, especially like you said, I mean, over there, performance and music and culture, it's just there's such an onus on it, and it's propped up so much, which I think is very important because it's just like we said in the like I said in the beginning, I mean, it's another avenue to be able to show off and showcase and prop up these topics that are in a more unconventional and more you can interact with it more than just a history book. Arts are very important. It's something that we're very lucky in our area of the country, and especially in our town of Plymouth here where we are, there's a very big support for the arts and culture, especially at the grade school all the way up through high school level, which I think is very important. And it's something that they take pride in over there. So I'm very excited to be able to see the show at some point. For our listeners, the whole album is available on Apple Music. I have listened to it. The music is great. To watch it in the live show setting would be unbelievable. So I guess the next question I would have for you is when will I have that opportunity?
Hopefully in the spring of 2027, possibly sooner. So the show is going to go back into a period of development. It's kind of this period that I think in a lot of ways we bypassed by kind of getting it to the stage within a month, from sort of page to stage quickly the first time around. But I think what we're really trying to do, over the next year is get ourselves to a position where we can spend kind of a month with a larger creative team. So we did this with a very small team and a very large cast the last time, but now we're working with, um, you know, two, really well-established musical directors of musical theater who are based in Derry, actually, and then in London. We're working with a music supervisor and music director who sort of reimagines and upscales the way that the music is presented on stage. We're thinking about a lot of the kind of script edits that sort of make the story kind of move along at a pace that's a little bit quicker, honestly. Like the is a little bit too long.
Okay.
Um, and, and then kind of, yeah, I I played the show on stage, and I could tell the scene where it was like, intermission hasn't come yet, and I can see, like, the husbands who need to go use the bathroom, and I'm like, "Intermission needs to be now." We should not be headed to Liverpool now. They're like, "Screw this. I cannot go to Liverpool now. I'm using the bathroom." But they're only like 5 minutes from intermission, so I know the pacing in that moment needs to be fixed. But then, stuff like the set and the costumes and the props and the lighting and the sound, and so, there's a difference between having a show and having, like, a production.
Sure. I mean,
And
I actually
so
I say sure, I have no idea, but I'm fascinated because I feel like I'm getting background information that the common person that just shows up and watches a production or a play or a musical, that they really have no idea what goes on behind the scenes. It's just the final product. This is great. I'm enjoying this.
yeah, it's I this is my first time through this as well, and honestly, I think a lot of what we see on stage in a major commercial sense now is like IP that already existed, right? It's a musical that was already a movie, or a musical that was already a popular TV show, or that sort of thing. And there are not a lot of new original musicals, and the journey that they go through is a really long one. Like we think of Hamilton as like this overnight sensation, but that was a 10-year process
Sure.
before
Yeah.
that was a Broadway show.
Yeah. And
So
I
we're
agree. I mean, the one my son wants to go see now is in Boston. They're playing Back to the Future. And I'm like, well, that was a great movie, but I don't know how it would do as a musical.
Yeah, I think it's a fun show, but it can be hard to get that kinda commercial funding unless you have a property that's already commercially known. So,
Mhm.
Legally Blonde, the musical, or, Back to the Future, the musical, those kind of things. The Lion King, right? It's like these are properties that people know, so they go, and it's a much longer slog when people are like, "The Irish Famine musical?"
Right.
Um, so yeah, but that's not how I was thinking when I came to the project. But yeah, that's kind of the next step for us, right? Is all that, sort of the best team of creative professionals that the show can attract, and we have that team in place now. So, that's really what the next year looks like for us. And then we now have this partnership with On Greenon, which is one of the major theaters, in the northwest of Ireland. It's in Letterkenny in County Donegal.
Okay, yeah.
So they're partnering with us for kind of our next, tour. So we will have, some developmental time there, and we'll launch some kinda, like, Irish and so our next sort of Irish tour there probably in the spring of 2027. So there's kind of a lot of the long-term planning that is dependent on, like, the sort of partnerships and funding type of things that we are able to work out in the next year.
And
But
speaking of funding,
it's looking like spring of 2027.
I know, this funding comes along with everything, and I would say to any of our listeners, Amy and her team does a really good job with regard to social media presence. They have an Instagram account. You guys have been kinda teasing that there's some stuff coming. Today, we record on August 15th, which is also my wedding anniversary, which my wife and I both forgot.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. But you guys are teasing for September 1st, and there's gonna be some reveals, and you're going through, a big push for fundraising now, which is obviously it's important to any production if you're gonna do it how you wanna do it. So can you tell our listeners anything about what that tease is all about, or just where they can go to support the show?
Sure. So they can go to inthemidstofplenty.com to learn about the show. And we're on all the social platforms, Facebook and Instagram, and then we have our website. So you can learn about the show on the website, and you can donate to support the show through the website. You can listen to all the music from the show through the website. It's all on there. Yeah, September 1st. So one thing that we're really excited about is that September 1st we're launching sort of a new uh, new artwork for the show.
Right?
So, if I say, like, Hamilton or if I say Lion King, like, there are images that come to mind for you, right?
Right.
Like, if I say Hamilton, you think, like, that star with the silhouette and the guy's finger pointing up, like, there are these images. So we have worked with an artist based in London who does a lot of this sort of musical theater, sort of poster artwork, like, what we call key artwork, who has developed this artwork for us, which we really love. Like, the process of working with her on our key artwork was really fun. So she has this really beautiful hand-drawn artwork that we are launching on September 1st along with a rebranded website. So kind of this is part of taking the next step forward in kind of the show's upscaling and professionalization, right? Is to have that artwork that people will be able to identify with the show. And so we're gonna share that on September 1st on social media and everywhere. We really can't wait for that.
That's great. I mean, the whole idea is just amazing. Now from a standpoint of asking you, because everybody, will I know I'm interested. We'll see if the rest of everybody else is too, but, from a pointed kind of personal question, I would ask, has there been an experience during this whole process that really sticks out as the most impacting you personally? Because I have to imagine there's gotta be, with everything that anyone's passionate about, there's always moments of self-discovery of how far you wanna take with this and how far you're gonna go and how committed and how passionate you are, and usually it takes particular moments during a process for those emotions to come out. Do you have a singular moment like that?
I sure do. So closing night of the tour. So I have 3 boys, and when we were on tour, I think at the time my boys were 13 and 16. And so my younger 2, my 13-year-old twins, they were very involved in the tour. That it took me to Ireland for we'd been in Ireland as a family for the summer of 2019, and then we all went over for 2022 for the month, of they came over for the kind of the development and stuff like that. And then 2023, we did the tour together as a family. And I played the piano in the show for that tour.
Wow.
Yeah, and my sons, they were just part of kind of the family of the tour. Every time we'd be loading into a new theater, they'd be bringing the stuff in and helping get stuff set up, or, we'd be rehearsing and they'd be making the runs to the shop to bring, water and chocolate bars to people. And then they worked at the merch tables where we'd sell CDs and other things, at the tables outside of, in the lobbies of the different theaters we'd be in and stuff like that. And so my younger 2 in particular just became part of the family of the show. And so, on closing night, I played the show and the obviously the last number, the finale of a musical is kind of a moment that makes people cry no
Mhm.
matter what. But when it's the finale of a musical that you wrote that has a tour that is ending, like there's extra crying.
Sure.
And and then, we broke down the set got broken down and packed up and all of that. And my 13-year-old boys, boy, I hope they don't listen to this because maybe they don't want me to tell this story, but my 13-year-old boys were crying as well. And, it just was this moment of like, I had dealt with a lot of guilt as a parent for putting this much work into something.
Sure.
Um, because I still have to get, spaghetti and meatballs on the table, right? Like I'm a mother first, and like this was such a weird thing to have our family do. Like, "Oh, we're gonna all go to Ireland for mom's musical." Like, "What? What are we doing?" So, to this moment at the end of that tour where it was like, okay, this had an impact on them too, and they have these friendships with people from this different part of the world, and they have learned about this different culture, and they have learned about a different community, and they have learned about, pursuing a project that you think is important and sticking with it and showing up for it even when it's a little bit of an unusual path to take at a particular point in your life, like that was pretty neat. They like to see like, okay, like they at the end of the day, like they were also really part of this.
Yeah.
And and I like that they have that from this experience. They are part of the trajectory of the show and they always will be.
Sure. One thing I have learned from what I do with the Hibernians, which God bless my family and my wife, because if it wasn't for the support of them, I would not be able to commit the time that I do. I mean, for something just like sitting here talking with you today, I mean, when
Yeah.
every minute that you're spending doing something like this that you're passionate about usually comes at the expense of spending time with them.
Yep. Yep.
And
Exactly.
for them to one thing I have realized is you don't underestimate your children and how much even at 13, my son is 12, how much they by watching you, how much they can actually comprehend
Yeah.
the importance of it and the passion of it. Yeah. I mean, I could only imagine the last night on I don't know if your sons will be happy the fact that you shared that, but, if there's anything else that I've learned, I really don't care about embarrassing my children anymore. They've gotten over the idea that their parents do that, so
Yeah, if my kids have listened to an hour-long podcast, I think they can handle they can handle what we get to at the end.
So, one thing that I wanna share with I won't go into all the details, but I will tease it that here in Plymouth, in the Boston area, on the South Shore, we are gonna make an announcement within the next couple weeks of a collab with Amy and In the Midst of Plenty that is going to really level up an event that we're gonna have and give people a little bit of exposure to the show and a couple of the numbers, and I think it's definitely gonna be worth everyone's time to come and experience that and meet Amy and hear about the show and really see some what am already expecting will be amazing performances. So, I'm very glad that we can make that kinda teaser announcement. We'll have more details about that later on in the coming weeks. But yeah, I mean, Amy, I would just like to say thank you so much for coming on today. This has been a great conversation. I feel like we could just keep talking and talking and talking, and then we'd have to
We will.
yeah, and we'd have to break it up into 2 episodes. Um, but I'm really excited of the idea of the show coming back. I will take Carolyn's advice, and I will get on a plane. I don't really need much of an excuse to come to Ireland, but that will be a good one. And I know my wife definitely would enjoy seeing, going over and seeing the show as well. And then hopefully in the future, after you're done there, you could bring the show to the States. I know you and Anne-Marie came over for a little kinda tour up the East Coast,
Mhm.
and from the conversations we had, which I totally understand, is that you were met with a lot of excitement for having a show like that come over here because I
We
feel
really were.
yeah,
Yeah, we really were, and I think we will do that before very long. I mean, that is our goal.
Yeah, I think a show like that is gonna I mean, like we were saying, you're even if you're 3 or 4 generations removed, if you know your family's history, you know what someone in your lineage has gone through, and I think experiencing that with the show would I think people would really be drawn to it, just to get it in that format other than, like we said, just reading it out of a history book. Not that that's not important as well. It's very important. That's a big thing that we are proponents of is going and finding the history and educating yourself. But this is another great avenue to be able to at least kind of whet the appetite. I could see someone who is very well versed in the famine being very appreciative that this show exists. I could also see someone who has the rudimentary understanding that we talked about, seeing this show and then being inspired to learn more about what happened and delve
Right.
farther into it. So,
That's the goal. I mean, you shouldn't have to be a US history buff to be able to sit through Hamilton, and you shouldn't have to know about French history to appreciate Les Mis, right? You should be able to wanna learn more about the story because you went to the show first. So,
right.
that's how we hope that the show reads for sure.
Yeah. But I will say, if you want me to write a letter to Kieran to say that you should get a degree certificate in the mail, I will do that because you, you must have gone through enough of a history lesson to get a minor in Irish history or something.
Yeah, maybe an undergrad minor, but
Yeah.
I'd say no more than
Well, Amy, again, thank you for joining us today and sharing the story behind In the Midst of Plenty. One more question I would ask of you, and I think I'll put you on the spot. Is we've had 1 or 2 episodes where we we go out with music from someone on the show. I would ask, could we get a digital file and go out of this week's episode with a song from the show?
Oh, absolutely. I will send one over right as soon as we're off this call.
That's great. Now, for everyone that is listening, what song do you think that you will send, and can you give a little background behind it so that people understand what they're listening to?
Sure. I think I'm gonna send you Your Mercy. Not necessarily because it's the biggest sort of showstopper from the show, but just because of the story behind it. So, Your Mercy is a song that was written using the actual text of a petition from a tenant on the Strokestown estate in 1848. So I had asked the historian who was advising me on the show, Kieran Riley, if he could send along the text of these petitions, the petitions that people were writing to beg their landlords for relief. And he sent me a few, and this one just really struck me. And I set it to music, and that's what became the song. So I will send along that song to you. And these are, this is my music, but these are the words that were written by a Strokestown tenant from 1848 that you'd be hearing in this song.
That's amazing. That's so powerful. Thank you so much for sending that over.
My pleasure.
Okay. So thank you again, Amy, for being on. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, share it with a friend. If you have a story that you want to tell or a topic you want us to talk about ourselves and you'd love to hear about, reach out to us by emailing us at craic@gmail.com. That's CRAIC on the coast at gmail.com. Next episode, we will have some information about where you might actually be able to see us live and in person. We're talking about recording the show on location. So we will have more information about that at next week's show. And until next time, Slán go foil, goodbye for now, and may the crack be mighty wherever you are. Thank you, everyone.
I most humbly request you won't be displeased. You won't be displeased with me for this addressing you, hoping to see went until harvest. I have buried my husband, 2 children this month past, and I lost your rent by burying them. My children are lying, I have not a bite nor a sup to give. Thanks be to God for all his mercies. And I state that my father-in-law damages what was committed by means of public works. After my husband was buried, his father and sister came and forced the only beast that I have. That man wants to put me out for nothing. He put me from getting the relief. My other children are lying, I have not a bite nor a sup to give. Thanks be to God for all his mercies.
Any man with half a heart will take pity on you.
Do you believe so?
I do believe so. And perhaps someday, not just the major, but your own children's children will read this, and they'll remember what was done to you, and they'll honor you. Now, how will we end it up?
So please do not close up the bowels, close up the bowels of compassion again.